They slammed him to the ground in broad daylight. No warning. No explanation. Just cold steel against his wrists and boots in his back. His crime? Wearing a suit, walking to his car and being a black man in the wrong neighborhood. Officers claimed he fit the description. But what they didn't know was who they were messing with. The man they cuffed and paraded like a criminal was no ordinary civilian. He was Donovan Ellis, a federal civil rights attorney with a national reputation, embedded in a DOJ task force investigating police corruption. And with that one unlawful arrest, those officers didn't just ruin their careers, they detonated a chain reaction that would tear open the dark underbelly of their entire department. This is not just a story about police brutality. This is about what happens when power underestimates purpose, when silence is replaced by evidence, and when a man weaponized by law turns the law against those who tried to break him. What unfolds next will shake a city, collapse careers, and ignite reform. So before we dive in, comment below where you're watching from, hit like if you believe in justice, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Now let's begin. It started like any other day. The sun had just begun to peek through the towering skyline of downtown Richmond, Virginia. Early light slanted between buildings, painting the streets with long golden shadows. The rhythm of the city was waking up, coffee shops buzzing, dog walkers bundled against the morning chill, office workers hustling toward their daily routines. From the surface, it looked like just another Monday in the heart of the American South. But in the middle of all this motion, one man stood out, not because he tried to, but because there was something about him that demanded respect without uttering a word. That man was Donovan Ellis. He walked with a calm, deliberate grace down 14th Street, a quiet confidence trailing him like cologne. Dressed in a navy blue tailored suit that hugged his tall frame perfectly, his shoes polished to a mirror finish, Donovan moved like a man who had already won the morning. The cuff of his crisp white shirt peeked from under his blazer sleeve as he adjusted his watch, an understated silver Omega, elegant but not flashy. Donovan was 36, successful, and smart. His phone buzzed in his pocket just as he approached his sleek black Tesla parked at the curb. Pulling it out, he smiled. It was a text from his mother, reminding him not to be late for dinner that evening. Fried catfish and peach cobbler, the message ended, followed by a heart emoji. Donovan chuckled, quickly typed, "Wouldn't miss it for the world," and slipped the phone back into his pocket. That's when he noticed them. Two police officers across the street, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other leaner, more twitchy, had been walking together, but suddenly their pace slowed. Their heads turned. Their eyes locked on him. Their body language changed, as if a predator had just scented a target. Donovan didn't recognize them. That wasn't surprising. Officers rotated through this part of the city often. But what was surprising was the way they stared. Their expressions weren't casual. It was scrutiny wrapped in suspicion. The taller one wore a name tag that read Officer McCullen, while his partner, the wiry one, was Officer Hale. Neither cracked a smile. Neither offered a greeting. Donovan stayed still. He had grown up black in America. He knew the rules of these encounters. His father had drilled them into him from a young age. Stay calm. Be polite. Don't run. Don't argue. Keep your hands visible. Be smart. Be safe. "Excuse me, sir," Officer McCullen said as they approached, his tone already clipped and commanding. Donovan turned to face them, still holding his phone. "Yes, officer." His voice was calm, measured. "Can we see some ID?" McCullen asked, skipping the niceties altogether. There was no explanation, no context, just a demand. Donovan raised an eyebrow but didn't let it show too much. "May I ask what this is about?" he replied, his voice even, controlled. He wasn't looking for a confrontation, but he knew his rights. McCullen didn't answer. Instead, he smirked. "It's a simple request. Let's not make this difficult." Donovan took a slow breath and reached into his inner jacket pocket. "All right," he said, handing over his driver's license. But I'd still appreciate an explanation. Officer Hale stepped slightly to the side, his hand resting a little too close to his holster. The move didn't go unnoticed. McCullen examined the ID for a long moment. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" he asked. Donovan frowned. "I just had breakfast. I'm heading to work." "Where exactly?" McCullen asked sharply. "The diner on Franklin Avenue," Donovan said. "And now I'm walking to my car, which is right there." McCullen wasn't buying it, or at least didn't want to. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. You matched the description." Donovan didn't have to ask what kind of description he matched. He already knew. Black man. Well-dressed. Alone in an affluent district. That was all it took. "I see," Donovan replied slowly. "Well, I'm sure it's a misunderstanding." McCullen took a step closer, invading his space. "What do you do for work?" "I'm an attorney," Donovan said. "I have a meeting in an hour. If we're done here, I'd like to get going." Hale snorted. "A lawyer, huh? You got anything illegal in that car of yours, counselor?" Donovan's jaw clenched, but he kept his tone diplomatic. "No. And I'd prefer if you didn't waste your time or mine." "You don't get to decide what's a waste of our time," McCullen snapped. "Step away from the vehicle." For a split second, Donovan froze. He hadn't done anything wrong. He hadn't resisted. He had complied. But his father's voice echoed in his memory again, "Don't be right and dead. Be smart and alive." He nodded slowly. "All right. I'm stepping back now." He raised both hands slightly and took a step away from the car. That's when everything escalated. Without warning, McCullen grabbed his arm and yanked it behind his back. Donovan stumbled forward, shocked by the sudden pain shooting through his shoulder. "Hey! What are you doing?" he asked, trying to stay composed. Hale was already moving in, grabbing Donovan's other arm and forcing him to the ground. "You're under arrest for resisting," McCullen growled as he tightened the handcuffs. "Resisting?" Donovan thought. "I didn't resist anything." But it didn't matter. In that moment, the narrative had already been written and none of it was true. Around them, the city kept humming until someone noticed. A woman on a nearby balcony gasped, her voice cracking. "Hey! I know him. That's Mr. Ellis. He didn't do anything." Others began to slow their pace. A couple walking their golden retriever stopped mid-step. The man pulled out his phone. "This is messed up," he whispered. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered. "You can't just arrest him like that. He wasn't even resisting." Donovan caught the eye of a teenager filming with his phone. A flash of hope sparked inside him. Maybe that video would matter. Maybe someone would believe the footage when the report said otherwise. As he was shoved into the back of the squad car, Donovan didn't shout, didn't curse. He sat upright, breathing slow. Through the window, he looked out at the onlookers and said just 3 words, "This isn't over." The car pulled away, silence falling briefly behind it. At the station, the contrast was jarring. Gone were the warm morning streets and the distant aroma of fresh coffee. Inside the precinct, the air was colder, staler. Gray walls, buzzing fluorescence, and a silence thick with bureaucracy. Donovan was processed like a common criminal. Name. Prince. Mugshot. He didn't speak unless spoken to. He didn't protest. He knew how fragile dignity could be in a place like this. The uniformed hands pushing you around weren't interested in your degrees or your bar membership. When McCullen and Hale finally shoved him into a holding cell, a cramped concrete space with a metal bench and a faint smell of bleach, Donovan didn't say a word. "You might be in there for a while," Hale sneered. Donovan sat down. Straight-backed. Calm. Silent. He wasn't afraid. But he was angry. Not just for himself. For every black man who had ever been profiled, detained, arrested, or worse for looking like a description. For every polite question mistaken for defiance. For every officer who had a gut feeling and never paid the price when it was wrong. He stared at the cold gray wall in front of him and whispered again, this time to himself. This isn't over. Donovan Ellis sat motionless on the cold bench inside the holding cell. The air was thick with disinfectant and something sour like sweat and stale fear. His wrists ached from the tight handcuffs that had only recently been removed. The cell door clanged shut behind him with a finality that echoed louder than any voice in the precinct. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that he had done nothing wrong. Still, the humiliation of it all clung to him like damp clothes. Outside, Officers McCullen and Hale stood near the front desk, trading smug looks. Think he's really a lawyer? Hale asked with a quiet snort. Probably just another punk in a suit, McCullen replied, though his voice wasn't as sure now. There was something about Donovan that didn't sit right. The man had remained calm. Too calm. Not defiant, not scared, just composed, like he had nothing to prove. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a younger officer. He had been watching from a distance, quiet, observant. His name tag read Officer Brian Kerr, and though he was new to the force, he had a reputation for thinking before speaking, rare in a department driven by gut reactions. McCullen, Kerr said, lowering his voice. Can I talk to you for a second? McCullen frowned. What is it? Kerr glanced around to make sure no one else was listening. That guy you just brought in, Donovan Ellis, I think I know who he is. McCullen stiffened. You do? Kerr nodded. I saw him in a feature piece a few weeks ago. He's not just a lawyer, he's a civil rights attorney. A big one. He's been involved in some pretty high-profile lawsuits. Police misconduct. Wrongful convictions. That kind of thing. McCullen's smirk faded. You sure? He asked, though his voice sounded less like a challenge and more like a prayer. Positive, Kerr said, pulling up an article on his phone. He's based in D.C. but travels around the country. His face was on the news last month. If we arrested him without cause. He didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication hit like a thunderclap. McCullen swallowed hard, trying to hide the sudden sweat forming along his brow. I'll take care of it, he muttered. Kerr nodded but didn't walk away. He watched McCullen with narrowed eyes before pulling out his phone and stepping aside. As he dialed, he glanced back once toward the holding cells and whispered, "Please pick up." Meanwhile, in a nearby office, Lieutenant Serena Vaughn was reviewing files from the night shift when her desk phone rang. "Vaughn," she answered. "Lieutenant, it's Kerr. We have a problem." Within minutes, Vaughn was walking down the corridor of the station with purpose in every step. She had only transferred to this precinct 3 weeks ago, but she already knew enough to read the patterns, the silences, the sideways glances, the names that never made it into reports. She found McCullen and Hale at the front desk, fidgeting near a stack of paperwork. "Officers," she said, voice sharp but calm. "Tell me about the man you brought in this morning." McCullen turned to her. "Name's Donovan Ellis. We picked him up on suspicion of resisting." "Suspicion," Vaughn repeated, her gaze steady. "What was he resisting?" "He questioned us," McCullen replied. "Got argumentative. Made us feel like he was hiding something." "And that justified handcuffing him in broad daylight?" she asked, arms crossing. Hale spoke up, trying to back his partner. "It was just a routine stop, ma'am." He matched a description. Tall, black, late 30s, nice clothes. "We thought." Vaughn cut him off. "You thought that made him suspicious?" Neither officer had an answer. "Take me to him," she said firmly. Down in the holding cell, Donovan was still seated, hands folded, face impassive. When the door opened and Lieutenant Vaughn stepped in, his eyes met hers. Calm. Watchful. Neither fearful nor hostile, just alert. "I'm Lieutenant Vaughn," she introduced herself. "I'd like to ask you a few questions." Donovan gave a slight nod. "Of course. I've been told you resisted arrest. Is that accurate?" Donovan's voice remained cool. "Not at all. I complied with every instruction. I asked why I was being stopped. That's when things changed." Vaughn took a moment to absorb his tone, polite, professional, not panicked. This wasn't a man who was trying to talk his way out of trouble. This was someone who had clearly been in this position before. "I see," she replied. "And your name?" "Donovan Ellis," he said, slowly. "Civil rights attorney. I live in D.C. I was visiting my mother here in Richmond. I had breakfast at a diner this morning. I was walking to my car when Officers McCullen and Hale approached me." That name clicked. Vaughn froze briefly. "Did you say Donovan Ellis?" "Yes," he said, calmly. Outside the cell, Officer Kerr entered the room, slightly breathless. "Lieutenant, may I have a word?" "It's urgent." Vaughn turned to him. "Speak." Kerr approached and whispered, "I confirmed it. He's the same Donovan Ellis who's been working with the Department of Justice. He's part of a federal investigation into racial bias in policing." Vaughn's heart skipped. She turned back toward Donovan, now seeing him with a completely different lens. The quiet confidence. The composed demeanor. The way he hadn't raised his voice even once. She looked back at McCullen and Hale, standing like schoolboys who'd just been caught cheating. "Get me your full report," she said coldly. "Every detail. Every step." Then she turned back to Donovan and spoke with something close to apology in her voice. "Mr. Ellis, we'll get this sorted." Donovan stood slowly. "Lieutenant, with respect, this isn't something you can sort in a room. This will go far beyond here." Vaughn didn't flinch. "I believe you. And I intend to do what's right." Back at the front desk, things were unraveling quickly. News had already started spreading online. Someone from the crowd earlier had posted the arrest video on Twitter. The caption read, "Black man in a suit arrested for doing nothing but existing in public. #Donovan Ellis #police brutality." By noon, it had over 500,000 views. Outside the station, a small crowd had started to gather. Protesters. Reporters. Neighbors. Donovan's name was on their lips, and their voices were rising. Inside, Vaughn stood at the window watching the crowd grow. "We're going to need a strategy," she muttered. "Because this is no longer internal." Lieutenant Serena Vaughn paced her office, the blinds drawn, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead. Her inbox was flooded. Calls were coming in from local reporters, community leaders, and worse yet, someone from the mayor's office. The viral video of Donovan Ellis's arrest had become a firestorm, igniting not just public outrage but something deeper, something more dangerous. She sat down, exhaled slowly, and opened a private browser window on her computer. Donovan Ellis. She typed the name and hit enter. Within seconds, the search results confirmed everything Officer Kerr had warned her about and more. There were articles from the Washington Post, op-eds in The Atlantic, even clips from MSNBC. Ellis wasn't just a civil rights attorney. He was a legal juggernaut, the kind who took down corrupt police departments, exposed systemic racism, and spearheaded class action lawsuits against powerful institutions. One headline caught her eye: "Federal probe into policing bias expands, Donovan Ellis joins DOJ task force." Another read, "Ellis targets structural corruption in Richmond, Detroit, and Chicago." Vaughn's throat tightened. Richmond. She clicked into one of the articles and found a paragraph that made her blood run cold. Sources confirm that Donovan Ellis is involved in confidential investigations across multiple precincts including unnamed departments in Virginia gathering evidence of racial profiling, false arrests, and internal cover-ups. She slammed the laptop shut. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. This was a catastrophe. Back in the precinct's main hallway, Officers McCullen and Hale sat at their desks typing out the incident reports Vaughn had demanded. Every click of the keyboard felt like a ticking bomb. McCullen's face was pale. Hale chewed the inside of his cheek nervously. "You think we're getting fired?" Hale whispered. McCullen didn't answer. His hands hovered above the keys. He couldn't even remember half of what they said during the stop. They hadn't expected consequences. They never did. That's when the door burst open. The room snapped to attention as Chief Raymond O'Hara strode in mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, blue eyes that didn't blink when he was angry. And today, he was furious. "Lieutenant Vaughn," he bellowed. She stepped out of her office. "Chief," she greeted calmly. O'Hara's eyes blazed. "Tell me you didn't let your officers arrest Donovan Ellis without cause." She didn't flinch. "They did. I've already opened an internal review." "Internal review?" O'Hara hissed. "That's not enough. We've got a civil rights lawyer in a holding cell, someone the Department of Justice works with, and a crowd of protesters outside." "I'm aware. We're one step away from a federal intervention." At that exact moment, a knock came at the glass front door. A young desk officer rushed into the hallway. "Chief. Lieutenant. There's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent." "Who is it?" The officer hesitated. "Federal agent. Mark Rowan. DOJ." Silence fell like a hammer. O'Hara adjusted his badge and muttered, "This just keeps getting better." Agent Mark Rowan walked in moments later, his presence cutting through the station like a scalpel. He was tall, with sharp features and a tailored dark suit. His federal badge gleamed under the overhead lights. He didn't bother shaking hands. "Chief O'Hara. Lieutenant Vaughn. I'm here regarding the arrest of Donovan Ellis." O'Hara cleared his throat. "Agent Rowan, we're..." Rowan held up a hand. "I'm not here for a back and forth. I'm here to explain what's happening, and what your next moves must be if you want this department to survive." Everyone in earshot stiffened. Rowan's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Mr. Ellis is not just a civil rights attorney. He is a federally embedded asset. He's been working with the DOJ for the past 8 months to build a case on systemic racial bias in regional police departments. Richmond was one of the jurisdictions under active review." The silence was unbearable. "By arresting him," Rowan continued, "you didn't just make a mistake. You may have compromised the integrity of a multi-state investigation." Vaughn's jaw clenched. Chief O'Hara looked like he had been slapped. Rowan stepped forward. "Effective immediately, you will release Donovan Ellis with a full public apology. This department will also submit to a temporary oversight committee until a DOJ inquiry is complete. Any resistance to these terms will be met with swift and decisive consequences." He paused, letting the words settle in the air like lead. "Oh, and one more thing," he said, looking squarely at McCullen and Hale, who had slowly emerged from their seats near the bullpen. "You two are suspended. Effective now. You are not to speak to media, other officers, or anyone outside internal affairs. Your badges. Now." McCullen tried to protest. "But we didn't know who he was," he never said. "It's not about who he is," Rowan snapped. "It's about how you treated him." With shaking hands, McCullen and Hale placed their badges and service weapons on the desk. Rowan turned to Vaughn. "You'll oversee the immediate release. Keep the media at bay. And don't let your chief screw this up any further." Without waiting for a reply, Rowan turned and walked out. Inside the holding cell, Donovan Ellis sat silently, his posture unchanged since the morning. But the sounds outside had shifted. Raised voices. Phone rings. Tension thickening in the walls. Then, the cell door opened. Lieutenant Vaughn stepped inside. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes held something deeper, something almost regretful. "Mr. Ellis," she said. "You're being released. This morning's events were a misunderstanding." Donovan stood slowly. "Is that what we're calling it?" "I know it's not enough," she said quietly. "But it's a start." He studied her for a long moment. Then nodded once. "Let's get this over with." As Vaughn led Donovan through the precinct, the station grew quiet. Officers turned away, eyes dropping. No one dared speak. Outside, the crowd had grown to nearly 200 people. Protest signs waved in the breeze. Chants rose and fell like waves against the brick walls. When Donovan emerged, cameras flashed. Microphones pushed toward him. But he ignored them. He walked past the line of police, through the crowd, and into the arms of his mother, who had tears in her eyes. "I'm okay," he whispered. "I'm okay." From the doorway, Vaughn watched. She knew this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The Richmond Police Department hadn't seen a crowd this large in years. By late afternoon, the front lawn was no longer just a patch of sidewalk and grass. It had become a battlefield of signs, voices, and camera lenses. Protesters held banners that read, "Justice for Donovan, Silence is Violence," and "Systemic Reform Now." Chants echoed against the brick walls of the precinct like war drums. The scent of sweat, urgency, and anger filled the humid Virginia air. Donovan Ellis stood near the edge of the crowd, flanked by his mother and a growing circle of community leaders, attorneys, and activists. His tailored suit was slightly wrinkled now. His collar loosened. But his posture upright, strong, and unshaken had never been more commanding. He hadn't spoken yet. Not publicly. Not even to the cameras hounding him for a statement. He was waiting. Inside the precinct, Chief Raymond O'Hara paced like a man trapped on a sinking ship. He had been through media nightmares before, but none like this. The usual strategies, delay the press, deflect the truth, throw out vague apologies, wouldn't work this time. Not when the man they had wrongfully arrested was one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the country. Not when the video had already surpassed 3 million views on social media. Not when the DOJ had sent in a federal agent to strip 2 of his officers of their badges on the spot. Lieutenant Serena Vaughn stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the crowd expand. "We need to address them," she said, her voice clipped but resolute. O'Hara sighed. "You think that'll calm them down?" "No," Vaughn replied. "But if we don't, they'll burn us down in every newspaper and courtroom from here to D.C." O'Hara stared at the podium that had been hastily set up outside. His stomach churned. "I'll do it," he muttered. "Good," Vaughn said. "Because this department has a mountain of reckoning ahead. Might as well start climbing." At 5:15 p.m., Chief O'Hara stepped out into the sea of voices. Flashes burst like lightning. Microphones clustered like vipers. He cleared his throat. "My name is Chief Raymond O'Hara," he began, voice trembling just slightly. "And I'm here to address the events that took place earlier today regarding the arrest of Mr. Donovan Ellis." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. "The arrest was a mistake," he continued. "It should never have happened. I take full responsibility for the actions of my department." A few people booed. Others simply stared, arms folded, unimpressed. "We recognize that this incident has caused deep pain in this community. It is not just about one man. It is about a larger issue, a system that too often fails the people it is meant to protect. We are suspending the officers involved pending an investigation, and we are cooperating fully with federal oversight." He paused. "This department must do better. And we will." When he stepped back, the silence was deafening. Then, someone from the crowd called out, "Where's Donovan?" Another voice echoed, "Let him speak." O'Hara turned away from the mic. Behind him, Donovan Ellis stepped forward. He wasn't angry. He wasn't smug. He was deliberate. The crowd hushed as he approached the podium. He looked out over them, hundreds of faces, strangers and supporters alike. "My name is Donovan Ellis," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And earlier today, I was arrested by 2 police officers while walking to my car." Cameras clicked. Phones rose. Every word now broadcast live. "I was accused of resisting. Of looking suspicious. Of matching a vague description," he said, gaze sweeping the crowd. "But what I actually did, was exist." The silence was painful. "And let's be clear," Donovan continued. "This isn't about me. It's about all of us. It's about the teenager stopped for walking home in the wrong zip code. It's about the mother who gets pulled over and asked if the car is really hers. It's about the father who gets tackled in front of his kids over a broken taillight." He paused. "Let it breathe. I've spent my career fighting these injustices in courtrooms. But today, I lived one. And I will not let it be buried under a press release and a handshake." The crowd erupted in cheers. "But we're not here to tear down," he added. "We're here to build. Real change. Real accountability. Real justice." Applause thundered across the precinct steps. And in that moment, something shifted. Donovan wasn't just the victim of police misconduct. He was the face of a movement. Hours later, back inside the precinct, Vaughn stood quietly in her office reviewing bodycam footage. She didn't need to see it to know what happened, but she watched anyway. The way Donovan had been approached. The way he had complied. The force used. The cuffs. The smirks. Her stomach churned. She made a note: no escalation. No resistance. Unlawful detainment. Then her phone buzzed. It was Officer Kerr. "Lieutenant," he said. "They're saying media outlets want interviews with Donovan. They're circling like sharks. And the mayor's office just called. They want to sit down." Vaughn rubbed her forehead. "Tell them we're reviewing our internal procedures." "And Donovan?" She thought for a moment. "Let him speak. Whatever he wants to say, we're not silencing him." That night, Donovan sat at his mother's dining room table. A plate of untouched fried catfish sat in front of him, still warm. But he had no appetite. Across the table, his mother Ms. Bernice Ellis watched him with tired eyes. "You okay, baby?" He nodded. "I will be." She reached across the table and held his hand. "You've always been meant for something bigger. Even when you were 9 and made your own neighborhood court with folding chairs in the backyard." Donovan chuckled softly. "Judge Donovan." "Yeah. I remember." She squeezed his hand. "Don't let them break your spirit. They tried. But you're still standing." "I'm not just standing," he said quietly. "I'm building something." Later that evening, Donovan logged onto his laptop and opened a blank document titled Community Justice Initiative, Phase 1. He began typing. Legal Aid Clinic. Oversight Board. De-escalation Training. Youth Civil Rights Education. And underneath it all, he wrote, "No more apologies. Only accountability." He hit save. Outside, the city buzzed with tension and hope. And inside, a movement had been born. Donovan Ellis had never intended to become a symbol. But in the days that followed his wrongful arrest, his name no longer belonged solely to him. It was spoken on street corners, printed in headlines, whispered in city hall chambers, and shouted in protest chants that echoed across Richmond. What had started as a moment of humiliation had bloomed into a movement, and Donovan, weary as he was, understood the gravity of what had been placed on his shoulders. He didn't run from it. He embraced it. From a modest corner office inside the Lincoln Community Center, once an abandoned rec hall now repurposed into a hive of grassroots activity, Donovan convened a meeting that would shape the city's future. Around the mismatched tables sat a group of teachers, clergy, activists, retired officers, lawyers, and students, all volunteers. All committed. There were no fancy chairs, no catered lunches, no sponsorship banners. Just coffee, notepads, and a shared fire burning behind their eyes. They called it the Community Justice Initiative. Donovan opened the session with a quiet confidence that commanded the room without raising his voice. "If the system won't fix itself, then we build the blueprint and force it to follow," he said. His first priority, a legal aid clinic that would provide free representation for victims of wrongful arrests, racial profiling, and police misconduct. A second initiative followed, establishing an independent community oversight board that would have direct access to case files, body cam footage, and internal investigations, giving real transparency to the public. The third leg of the plan was personal. Civil rights education in schools. Not just history lessons about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, but modern-day realities, how to assert your rights during police encounters, how to document injustice, how to organize safely. "We don't want our youth to fear the law," Donovan explained, "but we want them to know how to survive it and how to change it." The room erupted into a standing ovation. Plans were drawn, action items assigned. Donovan didn't just give them a vision, he gave them a mission. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Serena Vaughn was fighting a quieter war inside the Richmond Police Department. Reform was now mandatory, not optional. The DOJ oversight had begun, and every officer, every file, every complaint past and present was under scrutiny. Vaughn knew most departments would have gone into defensive lockdown mode. But she had made a different choice. She opened the books. She invited the Community Oversight Board inside. She arranged for officers to attend de-escalation training led by civilian instructors, including former protest leaders. It was messy. Awkward. Sometimes heated. But it was working. Officer Brian Kerr, the young patrolman who had first recognized Donovan, volunteered to be part of the pilot liaison program. He attended forums, listened instead of speaking, and slowly became a bridge between the department and the community. In one such forum, a teenage boy named Marcus stood up and told the room how he was stopped, frisked, and shoved into the back of a cruiser because his hoodie was too baggy. The room fell silent. Kerr didn't interrupt. He just said, "I believe you." For the first time in a long time, people believed back. The Community Justice Initiative's legal aid clinic was flooded within a week of opening. Mothers with eviction threats linked to past arrests. Veterans denied jobs because of old charges that never stuck. High schoolers facing court over petty misdemeanors. Each story was a mosaic of trauma. But Donovan's team didn't flinch. They worked late into the night. Filing motions. Making calls. Showing up in courtrooms where defendants used to stand alone, now flanked by attorneys who knew their names and stories. The local school district, once skeptical, invited Maria Alvarez, an educator from Donovan's team, to present the civil rights curriculum to the board. Her speech was brief but blistering. "We're not raising rebels," she said. "We're raising citizens who know the rules so they can change them." The board voted unanimously to adopt the pilot program. But change, real change, never arrives unopposed. Donovan knew that. He saw it in the anonymous threats emailed to his office. He heard it in the snide comments whispered by officers who still wore badges but hadn't learned a damn thing. He read it in the headlines from conservative outlets painting him as a radical, a race baiter, a publicity hound. He ignored it. Until one evening, as he left the community center, he noticed a man standing alone across the street. Dressed in a dark suit. Watching. Waiting. Donovan paused. The man nodded once, then walked away into the shadows. No words. Just presence. It was subtle, but chilling. Donovan didn't tell anyone. He simply doubled down. That weekend, he met with Lieutenant Vaughn in a neutral location, a small diner they both agreed felt less political. Over black coffee and silence, they spoke plainly. Vaughn admitted that the department had been complicit for years. That while she had done her best to follow the rules, the culture had rewarded silence over accountability. Donovan didn't gloat. He just said, "Then help me break the silence." They agreed to co-author a reform proposal that would go beyond symbolic changes. It would include mandatory community service hours for officers, psychological screening during recruitment, and a standing public forum every quarter. "We want transparency to become so routine, it's boring," Donovan said. Vaughn smiled. Boring sounds like heaven. Outside the diner, the city still pulsed with tension, but something in the air had shifted. It wasn't just protest anymore. It was progress. That Sunday, Donovan returned to the steps of the precinct not in handcuffs, but with a megaphone. He stood beside faith leaders, council members, and even Officer Kerr, who joined voluntarily. "Justice isn't a destination," Donovan told the crowd. "It's a direction. And we're moving." The people roared back in agreement. Late that night, Donovan returned to the community center, alone. He stood in front of the whiteboard covered in plans and post-its, exhausted but alive. He thought of the kids who would now know their rights before they ever needed to recite them. He thought of the single mothers no longer navigating courtrooms without defense. He thought of the system cracked, stained, stubborn but slowly, finally, beginning to bend. And he whispered to the empty room, "This isn't over." Not as a threat. But as a promise. Progress had a rhythm, a slow, grinding tempo that demanded patience, sacrifice, and sometimes blood. In the weeks following Donovan Ellis's surge to the forefront of Richmond's justice reform movement, that rhythm was interrupted not by exhaustion, but by resistance. Subtle at first. Emails that never arrived. Meetings that were suddenly rescheduled. Requests for public records that got lost in review. Then came the whispers, anonymous tips to the press questioning Donovan's funding sources, articles seeded with doubt about the true motivations behind the Community Justice Initiative. None of it stuck. But that wasn't the point. The point was to make him bleed by 1,000 cuts. And behind those cuts was something older, more entrenched than any one department. The system was adapting. And it had begun to fight back. Lieutenant Serena Vaughn saw it, too. In the eyes of the officers who stopped speaking when she entered the room. In the union reps who started pushing back against every proposal, no matter how small. And in Chief O'Hara, who had begun keeping her out of key meetings. He claimed it was to reduce media exposure, but Vaughn knew the real reason. Her allegiance was no longer with the boys' club, it was with the people. And for some in leadership, that made her a traitor. But she didn't back down. She doubled her oversight patrols. She authorized unannounced inspections. And she made it clear to every officer under her command, "You're either with accountability, or you're against it." But the real fracture came the day she opened an old disciplinary log buried deep within the precinct archives. Files long thought to be purged. Inside, records of complaints spanning a decade, many of them against now retired officers, some still on the force. Patterns emerged: traffic stops targeting black drivers without cause, excessive force cases that were closed in days, reports that mysteriously lacked body cam footage. Vaughn read through each one, her hands tightening around the edges of the pages, her mouth dry. The depth of rot was staggering. But one name kept reappearing, a former sergeant named Leonard Dalton, now retired but rumored to still pull strings from behind the scenes. Vaughn highlighted his name again and again. She needed to know more. Meanwhile, Donovan's work was entering dangerous territory. The Community Justice Initiative had filed 3 lawsuits in 2 weeks, one on behalf of a teenage boy wrongfully held without a guardian present, another against an officer who had allegedly tampered with footage, and a third against the department itself for failing to disclose public records. The media had become a double-edged sword. Some hailed him as a reformer. Others painted him as a radical intent on dismantling law and order. But Donovan didn't flinch. He appeared on community radio, town halls, podcasts, classrooms, wherever he could speak, he did. And always with the same refrain: we're not tearing it down. We're rebuilding what was promised. Then, one night, it happened. Donovan was working late at the center. Everyone else had gone home. He stepped outside to lock the door when he noticed a small object sticking out from beneath the windshield wiper of his car. He pulled it out. A plain white envelope. No name. Inside, a photo of his mother at the grocery store. Another of him walking with a young client after court. A third, the front door of his apartment. No note. No message. But the message was clear. The next morning, he showed it to Lieutenant Vaughn. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "This goes deeper than we thought." Donovan nodded. "I think someone's trying to scare me off." "They're trying to scare you because they know you're close to something." Later that afternoon, Vaughn got a call from an old friend in federal oversight, someone she trusted. The voice on the other end was low, urgent. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. We've been tracking financial transfers tied to several former officers. Shell companies. Fake charities. It's not just misconduct anymore, it's racketeering. Corruption. The kind that destroys entire departments." Vaughn's heart pounded. "Who's at the center?" The voice paused. "Dalton. And maybe Chief O'Hara." The silence that followed was thick with implications. Vaughn knew then that she wasn't just trying to fix a broken system, she was standing on top of a nest of vipers, and they were starting to slither. That night, she called Donovan and asked to meet. They sat in the back corner of an old church that had hosted some of the earliest town halls. "I have proof," Vaughn said. "Or at least the trail to it." Donovan leaned in. "So do I." They exchanged everything. Files. Testimonies. Patterns. Names. A map began to form, one of silent corruption, of pressure applied in the shadows, of reports doctored and lives ruined to protect a network of power that had operated unchecked for years. Together, they decided to prepare a formal brief to send directly to the federal prosecutor's office. Not to the department. Not to City Hall. Straight to Washington. But just as they began compiling the final files, a bombshell hit the news. A leaked memo from inside the department accused Vaughn of unprofessional conduct and inappropriate political collusion with civilian activists. It was retaliation. Fabricated, but dangerous. The memo claimed she had bypassed the chain of command and jeopardized investigations by involving Donovan Ellis in internal reviews. It was signed anonymously, but everyone knew where it came from. Vaughn called Donovan that night. "They're trying to take me down." He responded without hesitation. "Then we go public. Together." And the next morning, they did. They stood side by side at a press conference hosted outside the courthouse steps. Donovan wore the same blue suit he'd worn the day he was arrested. Vaughn, in plain clothes, stood with her badge clipped to her belt, a quiet defiance. The reporters pounced. Donovan stepped to the mic first. "Some people want this movement to disappear. They think if they smear the people behind it, the work will vanish. But we are not going anywhere. And neither is justice." Vaughn stepped forward. "This department has good officers. But it also has ghosts. And those ghosts have names. We will not be silenced by threats, leaks, or lies. We are standing for the truth, and we have the receipts to prove it." Flashbulbs lit up the sky. Across the street, inside a dark SUV parked out of sight, a man watched the press conference unfold on his phone. Leonard Dalton. He sipped from a travel mug, smiled without warmth, and muttered, "Let's see how far you're willing to go." The war for Richmond's soul had officially begun. And no one was safe from what would come next. The storm didn't arrive all at once. It came in ripples, whispers in courtrooms, closed-door meetings, anonymous tips dropped into inboxes. But then the ripples became waves, and Richmond could no longer pretend the water was calm. The morning after the press conference, national media outlets picked up the story. Civil rights attorney and police lieutenant joined forces to expose corruption within Richmond PD, headlines screamed it. Radio shows dissected it. Social media devoured it. Donovan Ellis's name trended alongside Serena Vaughan's. But with visibility came danger. The threats intensified. Donovan's office was broken into, nothing stolen, just files rifled through and a single phrase scrawled on the wall in marker, "You're next." Vaughan's car was keyed in the precinct parking lot. She found a hollow point bullet in her mailbox. And still, they pushed forward. The evidence they'd gathered was damning: financial records linking former Sergeant Leonard Dalton to private security firms contracted by the city, falsified training records, internal complaints purged from databases, surveillance logs that suggested officers were being directed to target community leaders known to challenge the department's authority. Vaughan had built the skeleton. Donovan provided the muscle. And together, with the help of federal contacts and local whistleblowers, they compiled a brief that was too detailed, too explosive, too undeniable to ignore. They didn't just file it. They published it. Open access. 72 pages. Names. Dates. Receipts. Within an hour, it was shared over 200,000 times. Inside the Richmond Police Department, chaos erupted. Chief O'Hara was summoned to City Hall. His press secretary issued a vague statement about unfounded allegations, but the silence from federal offices told a different story. By noon, subpoenas were flying. 2 precincts were locked down. Internal Affairs launched a simultaneous raid on Dalton's known associates. Phones buzzed. Radios crackled. Vaughan watched it all from her office, her badge resting on the desk beside her. She wasn't smiling. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired. But beneath the exhaustion was something harder. Justice. The kind you could feel, not just speak about. Donovan didn't return to his office that day. He went instead to a small high school auditorium where students were gathered for a civil rights workshop hosted by his team. He didn't plan to speak. But when he saw their faces, curious, hesitant, awake, he couldn't stay silent. He stepped to the podium, took a breath, and said, "When I was your age, I thought justice was something written in books. Now I know it's something we write together." They listened. He talked about the law, yes, but more about the fight. About fear. About standing your ground not because you don't feel fear, but because you know someone has to. That evening, the Richmond mayor held an emergency press conference. Chief O'Hara was placed on administrative leave. Dalton's name was officially tied to a federal grand jury investigation. Vaughan was appointed interim chief effective immediately. Reporters erupted with questions. She answered only one. "How does it feel to take command under these circumstances?" Vaughan stared into the camera, eyes hard. "It's not about command," she said. "It's about repair. And we're just getting started." That night, the city was quiet for the first time in weeks. No sirens. No marches. Just a cautious, collective exhale. Donovan sat alone on the rooftop of his apartment, the file folder that started it all resting on his lap. He opened it again. Inside was his arrest report. The original copy. He had requested it for personal reasons, but now he read it like a stranger might. Suspicious mail. Refused to comply. Resisted arrest. Lies. 3 sentences that nearly destroyed him. He pulled out a pen and scratched through them. Below, he wrote, survived. Resisted corruption. Rebuilt hope. He closed the folder and let the wind take it. The pages fluttered into the night sky, disappearing over the edge like a chapter finally ending. 2 months later, Richmond looked different. Patrol officers now rotated through community-led training once a week. The legal aid clinic expanded to cover housing and employment discrimination. The Civilian Oversight Board, once a draft proposal, now had real teeth access to records, subpoena power, and a seat at the table. Vaughn stood at roll call every morning. She didn't bark orders. She asked questions. Listened. And when new recruits asked her how to earn trust, she told them the truth. You show up when it's hard. That's when it matters most. As for Donovan, he kept working not because he had to, but because he knew change wasn't a moment. It was a process. He became a fixture at council meetings, strategy summits, and yes, courtrooms. He represented a woman arrested for filming a traffic stop. A father fined for speaking out at a school board. A former officer who had tried to blow the whistle a decade ago and was blackballed for it. One by one, brick by brick, the walls came down. 6 months after the day he was arrested, Donovan received a letter. Handwritten. From a high school student named Caleb. It read, I saw what they did to you. And then I saw what you did back. You didn't yell. You didn't hide. You built. I want to be like that. I want to be like you. Donovan folded the letter gently and tucked it into his jacket pocket. He wore that jacket to every court hearing from then on. In the end, the real victory wasn't just the policies that changed, or the men who were exposed. It was the culture, the silence that had been broken, the fear that had been named, the courage that had been caught like wildfire. Vaughn knew it when she walked into a precinct and no longer felt the weight of whispered judgment. Donovan knew it when a young officer saluted him without irony. The city knew it when people stopped asking, what's the point, and started asking, what's next? On a quiet Sunday morning, Vaughn and Donovan met at the same diner where it all began. No cameras. No speeches. Just 2 people who had been forged in the same fire. She slid a newspaper across the table. The headline read, New Chief Vows Permanent Civilian Partnership as Reform Model Spreads Nationwide. Donovan smiled. Think they mean it this time? Vaughn shrugged. That's up to us. Outside, the city moved on, imperfect, unfinished, but alive with possibility. Inside, 2 fighters drank coffee in silence, knowing the war had not ended, but that for once, justice had drawn blood back. In the face of injustice, one individual's courage and conviction can ignite systemic change. Donovan Ellis's story reminds us that standing up for what's right even when the odds are stacked against you can turn the tide on prejudice and corruption. When silence shields wrongdoing, speaking out becomes a powerful act of justice. True reform begins when we refuse to be bystanders and instead use our voices, our platforms, and our votes to demand accountability. Thank you for watching and being part of this journey toward truth and fairness. If Donovan's story inspired you, please give this video a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that matters. Together, we can hold power to account and build a more just world.